Okay, so today on our path of understanding our emotions so as to better control them rather than be controlled by them, we're going to start talking about the first individual emotion, fear. Stand by.
Welcome to the Turbocharged Entrepreneur, where we discover the secrets of mastering the mind game of success. Clear your mind's calendar. You are about to be infused with some high-octane wisdom that is going to help you turbocharge your positivity, your creativity, your productivity, and your profitability. Here now is your host, a former executive with the Fortune Global 100, a successful entrepreneur out of Georgia Tech's Advanced Technologies Development Center, an advisor in the Charlotte startup community, an expert in emotions management, Sean Webb.
Hey, welcome to the Turbocharged Entrepreneur, where we make you a better person so that you can be a better entrepreneur. I am your host, Sean Webb. Okay, so thank you for spending your time with me today. I will make sure that we don't waste even 1 second of it, and in that, let's get right into today's topic. So, we've been talking about emotions over the last few weeks and how to understand them so that we can better control them and not be controlled by them in our business life. And that is important. Why? Good business decisions often count on sound logic and non-emotional thinking. And so if you're being bogged down by a number of emotional thoughts, you're not going to be able to make good, rational business decisions. I mean, if you're sitting in a meeting and you're not listening because you're stewing and your mind is churning on some things that someone said minutes, hours, or days ago, then you're not going to get the full benefit of having that meeting. If you spend hours defending what people think about your efforts, then you're not focused on improving your product, and you're not focused on your business. You're focused on defending you. And these are the types of things that we need to get over in business, because a successful business is a succession of logical decisions. And so over the last few weeks, we talked about the basics of emotions so that we could start to understand how emotions are created in our mind. And today we're going to talk about the very specific emotion of fear. Now, to review, if you recall, all emotions are based off of one simple equation, which is expectation and or preference as compared to reality as perceived, or your perception, equals an emotional response. If your expectation and or preference is similar to your reality as you're seeing it, then a happy emotion or a positive emotion is the result. If your expectation and or preference is different than the reality you're perceiving, then a negative emotion is a result. Now, in the specific example of fear, which we have right here, fear is the expectation or preference that yourself or things associated with yourself be maintained or increased in value. And a reality is then presented that a threat exists. And this is accepted neuroscience and accepted psychology. Basically, fear is the emotion that results of us becoming threatened at any point in our existence. A bear walks out of the woods in front of us, right? And so there is a perceived threat to self, a threat to our body. The bear could maul us, it could kill us, it could eat us, it could tear off an arm, whatever. That is a threat to self. And in the limbic system, there is a process that creates fear that then floods our bloodstream with adrenaline, acutely focuses our attention, constricts our pupils so that we can focus on whatever it is, and we are prepped for a fight or flight response. Well, the difference between being afraid of a bear and afraid of our Super Bowl team being beat by the Bears is this. The cognitive attachment map. Okay, now, why does this come into play when we're talking about emotions in business? Okay, so the self, our body, our physical existence, the things within the confines of our skin are an attachment on our map. We identify our body as a sense of self. And anytime a sense of self comes into threat, fear is generated. Okay, so your body's center, dead center on this attachment map. But other things get attached to this map. Your religion, your politics, your favorite sports teams, ideas about life, things that you identify with, your family, your friends, your stuff. And so at any point that those things come into threat, fear is generated. If something threatens your family or friends, or you're about to lose all your stuff, fear is generated in your mind because of the attachments that you make beyond just being your body. So this right here is the magic bullet that psychology has been missing for the last 4,000 years. Because guess what? Psychology is still muddling around in the dark trying to figure out why a bear can elicit fear and why your favorite sports team losing to the Bears in the Super Bowl elicits a physiologically identical fear. People still haven't figured that out. There are a lot of studies actually that support this model, and they're on the webpage that I have, compassionatecomputing.org, which is a separate project that I'm working on to bring emotions and emotional understanding into the realm of computing. But this right here, this cognitive attachment map, is what makes the difference between understanding the fear about a bear and understanding the fear about something that you're attached to also becoming devalued, such as your favorite sports team losing to the Bears. So, your business is on this cognitive attachment map. Your individual projects are on this cognitive attachment map. Your expectations and or preferences about how things go for every single day and everything that you have in your life is found on this cognitive attachment map. And so that's why you can have an expectation of how your day is going to go. And if it doesn't go that way, it throws you into a tizzy, right? Because your expectation and or preference about that attachment is not meeting your reality as perceived, and therefore you can have these microbursts of negative emotion. Now today we're going to talk about fear. And fear, as we talked about, is the difference between your expectation and or preference about whatever it is, and then something threatening your whatever it is. So let's take an example. Let's say you launch a brand new product or service and sales aren't going well for the first couple weeks or the first month or whatever, not as you expected them to be. All right, so now on your cognitive attachment map, you have an expectation and or preference regarding the sale of your product. You would expect or prefer that your products sell well, right? Your product or service or whatever it is. And so that feeds into the equation of emotion. You have an expectation and or preference, and then your reality is that you're looking at the sales sheet and you're not seeing the numbers that you wish to see. And at this point, you're starting to have a negative emotion. Now, regarding the actual sales sheet, we'll talk about sadness later or disappointment. We have emotions that fall into categories. But let's talk about the sales sheet itself. You might be disappointed on the sales. We're going to talk about sadness later. But regarding the future revenue, that's what we're talking about here. Regarding fear, you start to get a little nervous about how things are going to go for your product and service. They're not going as well as you expected them right now. And so you're now also then going to experience fear about the future sales of your product or service. Why? Because you have an expectation or preference about the sales of your product and or service, and now you have a threat, you have evidence that your product is not going to sell well, potentially. And so now you have a threat to that expectation and or preference regarding the sales and revenue of your product. And so that creates the emotion of fear. Now, fear has different severities, and we talked about attachment level last week a little bit, and this is where that comes into play. How attached you are to your expectation and or preference, or the attachment itself, how close this is to your heart, depends on how much fear you are going to experience or how much of any emotion you're going to experience in any particular situation. Now, fear has multiple levels. Low-level fear exhibits as a concern, and it could be a mild concern or a high concern. And then you have the middling fears, which would be fearful or afraid. And then you have the high fears, which would be horror, terror / panic would be the highest level of fear that exists. And so depending on how attached you are to your whatever it is that's feeding the equation of emotion, that will determine how much fear you experience in any situation. Let's say you have a small product or service that you're throwing out as a small subset of your business. Your worry about that, your fear about it failing is going to be small in comparison to if your product or service was your entire business. This either fails or it succeeds, and in so, your entire business fails or succeeds. Okay, well, that is a higher level fear that you're going to experience because of the level of attachment that you have to that thing. Okay, so as not to lose you, let's go back and review for just a second. You have this emotions thing in your brain that is automated, that basically is dependent on a number of variables. And those variables come down to your expectation and or preference in comparison to what you're seeing from the world, and that creates your emotions. Your expectation and or preference is set by the things that you're attached to in your mind, which include, of course, your body, but also the cognitive attachments that you make over time to your life story, the people around you, the things around you, and the things that you attach to, such as your business, such as your individual expectations for your day, the minutia that includes the things that you do as a part of your everyday business. And that then generates the specific emotions based on how things are going in your mind. You can change what you're attached to, you can change how you see things, and that will change your emotional outlook. But it all comes down to this simple process. And this simple process, based on some specifics, can explain 80 plus emotions in your mind. And they're all governed by the variables that you are controlling in your own mind. So if you can control the variables, you can control your emotions. So how do we defeat fear in business? And how would fear manifest in business? Why do we want to consider beating fear in business? Well, fear in business exhibits quite often because of the number of attachments that we have to make to our goals and to our expectations and our preference regarding the things that we're attached to in our business. And in fact, fear can rear its ugly head in our thoughts of even starting a business. What if it fails? What if I fall flat on my face, right? These are what if my self becomes lessened because of this whole experience, right? That's a threat to self. The expectation and our preference is that you would love everything to run perfectly and be awesome and yada, yada, yada. And then the perception is, well, what if it doesn't? Then that is where fear enters the picture. So fear can paralyze you. Fear can paralyze you in your making your decisions. Fear can paralyze you in you taking actions. Fear can, worrying about fear can take you off track from the things that you need to do and the execution that you need to commit yourself to be able to get things done and to succeed. So you need to understand fear, and you need to take fear out of your way, because fear sucks. And my basic attitude? Fuck fear. This should not ruin your life. This should not rule your life. It should not even be a factor in anything that you do in business. And so how do we overcome fear? Is by, one, understanding the process. Because there's this thing in psychology called the observer. And at the point that you can get into the space of the observer, you are no longer affected by the automated processes in your mind as much as you were at the point that you were involved in them and wrapped up in them and being controlled by them. So at the point that you can understand when you're experiencing fear, what's going on inside your head, okay, there must be something that I'm attached to that is now being threatened. At that very second, at that very split second, you are now becoming the observer. You are stepping into the space that you are separated from the thing that is being affected by the emotions, and now you are simply observing the emotions. And that's a huge step, because at the point that you can enter the space of the observer and see what's going on with your emotions, you are no longer affected by them as you were previously. And so that's step one. Step two is then being able to, in real time, analyze what's going on inside your mind to be able to create the fear that is becoming present in your consciousness. What are the attachments that are being threatened? What attachment that you have in your mind, what idea is being threatened, what project, what thought, what expectation and or preference is now being threatened within your mind to create the fear that you are experiencing? Because at the point that you can then also look at that, look at the attachment itself, not just the process of the fear being generated, but the attachment itself, now you're even taking a further step back to say, okay, now I don't have to be as attached to this thing in my mind as possible, and I can do a pragmatic analysis of the situation and decide what to do from a logical perspective, right? There are some things that are governed by nature that you're not going to be able to get over. Like if a bear walks out of the woods in front of you, you are going to shit your pants. Okay, you're going to freak out. Your adrenaline is going to flood your bloodstream. But at the point that a potential failure of a project that you have going on at your business comes into play, now you can control that much better. And you can make better logical decisions about the actions that you need to take moving forward to make sure that the outcome or the potentiality of the devaluation or the threat doesn't occur. right? If you can do an analysis of why am I fearful? Okay, so my expectation or preference is that whatever it is goes well, and now there's a threat that it might not go well, or now there's a threat of a devaluation here. Now, instead of being stewed in the fear or being controlled by the nervousness or the whatever it is, now you can take action to make sure that this threat does not come to fruition. And now you're being an effective business leader. Instead of being governed by fear, you are governing fear. And that is what being an effective entrepreneur is all about. If you want to get the details of how emotions work in your mind, then you can pick up my book, How Emotions Work in Humans and Computers, which can help you understand the minutia and all the variables that come into play, because there are a number of other variables that you need to be able to control beyond this basic stuff that I'm teaching you. But beyond that, next week we'll talk about, I don't know, anger, sadness, one of those, maybe worry, maybe regret, who knows? Tune in and find out, because all of those things can inhibit your ability to be an effective entrepreneur and an effective business person, and we're going to remove them from your life, because doing so is fucking awesome. I love you, people. Talk to you next week. Peace.